Viewers of PostScript, hi, I'm Ken Harmon, editor of West Trade Review, and we have a very special guest with us today. We have poet Nancy Lynée Woo. Nancy is currently living in Long Beach, California, and she spends her free time hitching a ride to the other side of maybe. She is an MFA candidate at Antioch University, the recipient of fellowships from PEN America, Arts Council for Long Beach, and Idlewild Writers Week. Her most recent chapbook is titled Good Darkness and was selected as a semifinalist in the Sunken Garden contest with Tupelo Press. She also has two poems recently published in West Trade Review. Times Like These appeared in the winter 2020 edition, and Naysaying the Noise is forthcoming in our spring 2021 edition. Nancy, welcome to West Trade Review's Postscript.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Hi,
It was
we're
great.
so happy and excited to have you here with us. So let's just get started with a little bit from your bio there. You mentioned hitching a ride from the other side of nowhere, of maybe, and so I wanted to just start with to ask you what you meant by that. Like, what does it mean to hitch a ride from the other side of maybe? Because it kind of sounds fun, and I was just kind of interested in knowing what that meant.
Yeah, I think it is pretty fun. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming, a little exhilarating. It's interesting. I think I heard you say hitching a ride from the other side of maybe. I always thought about it as to the other side of maybe, but you know what? I think we can go both ways. Uh,
Why not?
I think there's some other world out there that is beyond our third dimension and fourth dimension perceptions of space and time. Like, what's beyond space and time? That's where I want to get to. That's like, to me, that's sort of the other side of maybe. I can't entirely elucidate the steps to get there because I think everyone has a lot of different steps. But as a poet, I'm constantly trying to just open the channel to get on the train to travel wherever the stars want me to travel. So I've since the pandemic started, I've been up between 4 and 5 a.m. most days in the channel, hitching that
Nice.
ride.
That's the thing to do these days. Go with the flow.
Yeah.
Right. So, do you recall the moment that you first decided to call yourself a poet? And could you sort of talk about that a little?
Yeah, that's funny. A lot of people have a difficult time, including myself, taking on the name poet or even writer for some people. So for me, I've been writing poems since I was a child, secretly during my teenage years with all the angst that we know about in the teenage years. And, I didn't know that poet was such a thing. Like, I didn't know you could be a poet. Like, when I was a child, I didn't know there were real living poets walking the earth. And when I was about 22, I came across a real live literary press that was in Long Beach, California, here where I landed. And I remember just being blown away by the performances, by the people. The press was called Right Bloody, and they left Long Beach to go to Texas afterwards. Anyway, you could probably cut that. But the point is, I remember walking around my living room, sharing an apartment with a couple of other young girls, and realizing that poetry was something that I had always had inside me, but was just allowing to come out to the surface. And I would stomp around my apartment just saying, I'm a poet. I'm a poet. I'm a poet. Because no, I had to say it out loud, I think, to myself, to anyone within earshot, to just sort of make it real. So I do remember that specifically. I think I was probably 22, 23.
So where do you think that urge to speak truth like a poet does sort of comes from?
Oh, I think it might be different for everyone. So obviously, I can't speak for anyone but myself. But for me, I know that it came from a childhood of growing up in a very dysfunctional family in which the truth was not spoken. A lot of very subtle omissions and lies and untruths were spoken. But something inside me as a child felt like I could feel that there was this wavery sort of reality in which there was another layer underneath what I was seeing, what I was hearing. And to me, it was sort of a survival mechanism to go to my notebook as a child and write to myself and say, this is what I see. This is what I think, even though the adults around me are saying and doing confusing and different things. So for me, that's where it came from. I had to navigate my own reality. And yeah, and so that's part of the answer at least.
I think that's the perfect segue into the next question. In the past, you referred to a quote by poet Robert Carr, and he said that, quote, poets repeat the same prayer in different words, and you say for yourself that prayer is to empower grace. What does that mean for you as a poet to empower grace?
I love that quote by Robert Carr. It's kind of like the quote about film directors
Mhm.
trying to tell the same story over and over again in different ways. Um, so grace to me is something interesting. I wasn't really raised with any religious background. Grace to me means, well, I had a little card. It was like a little you know, fancy little card with a definition on it when I was a child, and it said my name, Nancy. And it said my name, Nancy, came from the Hebrew word Hannah, which came from the word for grace. So grace really stuck with me. I thought about, what does it mean that my name means grace? And the definition for grace on that card was the light that still shines in the darkness. And so I've always thought about that. And I thought about empowering grace to mean that there is strength and courage that can come from softness and love. Grace, I think, has the connotation of light, of something very uplifting. And I want to empower that. I want to empower the state of lifting. And that's what I think about with grace is, we are all humans and we have all been to the depths of grief and despair and rage and loneliness. It's just the way that life is. And I think that the challenge is to just not get stuck there in a place where it can become violent and mean and destructive. So to empower grace, to me, simply means to let's give a voice to helping each other and lifting each other up and caring for one another. I'm looking at my bookshelf. One of my most influential books I've ever read is called The Moral Animal by Robert Wright. And it's a book on evolutionary psychology
Mhm.
that posits that, you know, humans have a moral right, a moral obligation to help each other. Um, so at the end of the day, I think everything I do, everything I write, I try to have a sense of uplifting myself, uplifting others in mind.
So was it that sort of urge to help each other and lift other people up that sort of led you to create the social justice literary press that you created back in 2014?
Yes, absolutely. um, I tend to be the type of person who has more creative ideas that I can keep up with. So that was definitely one of my first experiences as a young woman creating something in the world. So Lucid Moose Lit was a social justice focused literary press that me and my friend Sarah Thursday started just to put together some anthologies on different social topics. So the first one was on poverty, because she and I both grew up with difficult circumstances. And we started writing about it, sharing about it, and we started talking with people about it. And we realized like this is a subject that is difficult to talk about. It's not like your typical fun, summer conversation.
Right.
Um, but it's important. And poetry and literature is a way to access those sorts of conversations. So we were having such a great time that we decided to do it in a more official way. So we put out the call to our creative network of poets, artists, fiction writers, nonfiction writers, and we got a bunch of submissions, amazing submissions, and basically taught ourselves how to launch a press and publish a book. And we did two anthologies. The second one was called Like a Girl, Perspectives on Feminine Identity. And it was beautiful. I mean, just learning how, as a journal, right? Just learning for us, like
Mhm.
learning how to go through that process. Our second one was just aesthetically more delightful than the first one. Um, and it was an incredible experience. I I have had to let it go over the years. We only did those two journals just
Mhm.
because I got into the Penn Center's Emerging Voices Fellowship at the same time that the second journal was in production, and here I was then faced with the colliding worlds of, okay, I need to focus 100,000% on my writing. Oh wait, I also need to focus 100,000% on this journal, and I need to focus 100,000% on making money and being a human and living. So I just I realized my limits. Let's just put it that way. Um, but my background is actually, in sociology. So to me, converging social issues and the arts has always been just a natural confluence, like just, and I still try and do as much as I can in every way possible, wherever I can, without burning myself out as an activist as well as an artist.
What role do you think poetry plays in social justice?
Oh, I have been asking myself this for years, and my answer has changed a lot. At first, I was like, well, poetry can't do anything. I am a recovering nihilist, I think. And now at this point, I actually believe, especially I think in the last 4 years, I have seen the power of poetry to connect with people, to allow people the deep space to think, to process, to question, to feel empathy, to listen to other people's experiences. Like just being able to connect with another human being who has had a completely different life experience than you. And rather than, let's say, encounter them in an awkward social conversation, well, it doesn't always have to be awkward, but let's just say, you're encountering someone on the page on a poem or on YouTube watching a video, and maybe you get access to that little slice of humanity that you wouldn't have access to before, because poetry is all about interiority as well as, being in the physical world. So I think poetry can play a huge role in, how do I even say it? Enlightening. Like, that sounds a little, oh, we're trying to enlighten. But I do think it is, I do think poetry is a vehicle for,
For maybe fostering understanding, do you think?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, these are definitely times for that, right? That we're living in now.
Yeah,
Which leads me
absolutely.
to the poems of yours that we published. So in the winter edition, we published your poem Times Like These. Um, and the title of that poem seems to be a reference to Adrienne Rich's 1995 poem, What Kind of Times Are These? And in particular, I thought your poem really resonated with her poem and a particular stanza in her poem. And in that particular stanza, the speaker states, and this is a quote, "I've walked there picking mushrooms at the edge of dread, but don't be fooled. This isn't a Russian poem. This is not somewhere else but here, our country moving closer to its own truth and dread, its own ways of making people disappear." So could you discuss what led you to write Times Like These and what role Rich's poem played in that poem's evolution?
Yeah. So Adrienne Rich was one of the first poets I ever studied as a teenager in high school. And this poem, I think, is just incredible, first of all. And during the summer of 2020, during the Black Lives Matter protests and in the summer of the pandemic, I was hosting a daily writing group called Rise and Shine. So April 1st for 30/30 National Poetry Writing Month, I started off with my first prompt. We went for 3 months. So I created this space and it was free, it was donation based for anyone to come. I would choose a poem and then create a prompt. We would write and then we would share. So I had 91 poems going at that time, and this Adrienne Rich's poem happened to be one of them that I shared. So I would write along with everyone else. And so I was writing Times Like These. My poem came in response directly to Adrienne Rich's poem. And I think the influence there is pretty clear as you read that section. And I found it striking that so much of her words at that time I felt were still relevant to right now. Like, the details may change over the years, but there's something very true about her words that this is not somewhere else. This is here. And I think, considering what we have seen in this country, it's very much still here, whatever that it is, which we, could talk about. But so yeah, I think that also I will just say, having a space to share that sort of content with people was really helpful for myself and for others. Like, I wrote that poem and I remember reading it on the spot. It was one of those unicorn poems that came out pretty much fully formed.
Mhm.
And I remember reading it, and I remember my body shaking as I was reading it. And as soon as the last word exited my mouth, I felt like something very physical had just happened to me. I wasn't sure what it was, but I had to. When I finished the meeting, I had to go cry and meditate.
So it was very
Like, let the
cathartic.
it was, yeah.
Well, could I ask you to read Times Like These for us?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. And I think this is the one. Yes, this is the one. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So whenever you're ready.
Okay. Times like these, with an, sorry, let me start over. Times like these, after Adrian Rich, and with an epigraph from Donald J. Trump. Big China virus breakouts all over the world. Considering times like these, I imagine everyone wants a home. It's necessary to talk about home. Who has one? Who doesn't? A child in a motel room bangs a plastic cup against his mother's half-packed suitcase as gallons and gallons of milk curdle dumped. A migrant worker watches strawberries rot on the vine. Considering times like these, it's necessary to talk about how food grows in stock, on trees, in bushes, underground where worms make magic of our scraps. Tanks parade down the White House lawn, littering the news with stripes. I think of Rome as if they didn't know what was coming. I'm not sure the exact date the avalanche began its slow descent down the hill, and perhaps we've always been bloating, but certain homes at the bottom are burning. Peace begins when the hungry are fed, and mountains of zucchini are rotting quickly without a sales plan. A paper pyramid is a shape no human can live in, and it's necessary to talk about ditches in times like these. I look out my window and see a guard with a gun. We've seen this before, haven't we? The boots, the cracks in the floorboards, the bodies, and the unbelievable horror of a rifle in the hands of a man who has pledged allegiance to a flag he believes is unburnable. Considering times like these, it's necessary to talk about my Chinese nose. How I have the face of someone who could easily disappear in the middle of a sentence.
Such a great poem. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
So let's move on to a discussion of your other poem that's forthcoming in the spring edition of West Trade Review titled Naysaying the Noise. Could you speak to the significance of that title, Naysaying the Noise, and discuss how this relates to the poem's opening line, which I thought was amazing, which is, I haven't found one thing the stars aren't a cure for.
Well, thank you. Well, let's see. I know naysaying is a very archaic word. And so, I thought about that when I decided to title the poem. But I really couldn't find another word that meant to naysay, to speak against or to go against. And I've been very interested in the tension of going against things right now, thinking about what are we resisting when it comes to the resistance of authoritarianism and power. So I wanted to resist a little bit and push back against the noise of, the news, the lies, Fox News, the propaganda. It's everywhere. It's incredible. Like it's a little bit, it's terrifying, really, right? Like
Yeah, it is. It's very terrifying.
yeah, it's almost, is it anyway, it's hard to find words for it to articulate, I think, if you know what's going on. So anyway, this poem is really a response to that confusion and outrage and fear. And so I really found solace in nature over the past year, especially of the pandemic, because seeing how our structures of power are truly, truly dysfunctional. And I realized that the man-made social, structures that we live in, government and corporations that are all oppressing people and destroying the environment, those cannot be trusted. There's just a lot of lies, and so I wanted to get away from that. It's like that feeling of I know that I need to stay in it. I know that I need to stay present. I know that I need to listen and be aware and awake. However, like I felt my brain was literally exploding, like with all of the sound everywhere. So the first line of this poem really was thinking about how, even with all of that, just going up to Joshua Tree National Park, here in Southern California, I have a very special connection with the desert. Like being able to do that helped me clear my head and find, like, because there's no solution when I'm in a state of that level of anxiety. It's it's not productive, and I really needed to get out of that.
That's perfect segue into this next question, which is, um, that exhaustion you're talking about that comes from all of this, well, everything that we're dealing with, all of it. In your poem, you speak of the dead glory of a nation obsessed with itself. What does that mean to you for a nation to be obsessed with itself?
Well, I think probably maybe most nations are, fairly obsessed with themselves as the qualification of being a nation, but especially the United States, just growing up saluting the flag and, the American pride and the American dream and all of the rhetoric that I grew up with personally. Um, it it feels false in some ways. I mean, thinking about globalization and the ability we have to connect with people all over the world, even like right now on this Zoom call across the country,
Yeah, yeah.
it's pretty incredible. And I think that we need to move beyond an old paradigm of nation states. I mean, I'm not going to tell you I have all the answers, but at least thinking about what the next step is beyond nationalism, I think is a huge question for every human on the planet, I suppose, to ask themselves, because we are no longer separated geographically, with our globalized food chains and our globalized information networks. I mean, as a mixed race person, there are not even, race is a construct in the first place, but there's not even, those lines are disappearing. So I think that the grid, if I think about it visually, the grid of a nation, what that means with its borders, is shifting. And I just think that is something something important to think about, to be less obsessed with being part of a country and more invested in being part of a community. That's how I think about it. Local communities, you think about think globally, live locally. I'm very
Right.
involved in it. Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful way to think about it. So, speaking of community, the natural world in your poem seems to be a refuge, maybe in a sense, perhaps, at least thematically, a community, a refuge from all the noise emanating from culture. So, particularly like the last line, or the line, quote, to get lost in the ridiculousness of an acorn, and enjoyed the final line where the speaker refuses to listen to the man on the news spitting his globs of fear in a language the natural world doesn't understand. So, what is it that you think the natural world has to teach us all?
Oh, this is the best question. I love this question. I am looking at my cat sleeping here in my office. Like I've got my dog in the other room. I watch Caesar Milan like obsessively. Um, I love camping and hiking and being outside. Gosh, there's so much. I feel like my answer could change literally every single day. Like I think we can learn from the natural world every day, wherever we are. I mean, I live in a very suburban area, but I go outside in the morning and I hear the birds and I see that we have this great flock of parrots here in Long Beach that's very loud. And they're always just bunches of them just calling across the sky. It's fantastic. And I learned from my dog all the time about how to be present, in the
Yes.
moment, how to be in my body. I think if I were to, one thing that's coming to me that we can learn from nature is how to be in our physical bodies. Because when I'm looking at a screen, there's so much that or a book, there's so much that's happening in the frequency of my mind. And don't get me wrong, it's fun as all get out. Like I'm hitching that ride to the other side of maybe all the time, and too much without balance. And sometimes I feel like I forget that I have a body, like I'm like a floating cyber mind, especially with all of our connections to technology. So being in the natural world helps me tune into the fact that I am an animal, because humans are still animals. That's controversial to some, but I think it's obvious.
Actually, I was going to ask you about that. Like, do you see humans as separate from the natural world? Because a lot of people do see it that way. And and because people do see it that way, do you think that creates other kinds of problems because humans see themselves as separate from?
Absolutely, 100%. I remember coming across Pico della Mirandola's philosophy. I think he was in the 1700s. Oh my gosh, my history. But basically, I remember learning in college about the beginning of the hierarchical understanding of humans, where there's God, then there's man, then there's woman, then there's domestic beasts, and then there's wild beasts, and then there's plants, and then there's algae, and then there's non-life forms at the bottom. And man has the special place of being right below God, and therefore has dominion over the natural world. So I
Mhm.
believe that has influenced so much of society, and it's so wrong. Like it's like that idea is wrong. It's wrong. We need we need to replace that idea with a different idea. For example, humans are an animal, evolutionarily speaking,
Mhm.
that has consciousness that we can identify and articulate, but we are still part of the natural world. And this is important because with the way that humans are destroying the natural environment and causing species to go extinct, and polluting our natural resources and burning down our forests, I mean all of it, it's all interconnected. And thinking about the philosophy that humans are separate from nature is, yeah, it's wrong.
So
It's just wrong.
how do you think some of these things we've been talking about sort of show up in your poem, They Say in the Noise? Like, what was it that led you to write that poem? Was there one specific thing that sort of prompted it
Mm.
to happen, or?
You know, I'll be honest, I don't remember right now,
Mhm.
but I do know one thing that sparked it was I went to go camping up in Mono Hot Springs in Northern California, and I got to go to a hot spring. I think pretty sure this was my first hot spring, and it was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had. And I just was thinking, how many people have been to a hot spring? You
Mhm.
know, like I don't know. I know a lot of my friends haven't, and I had this urge to be like, let's everybody, let's all go to a hot spring. Come on, this is the best. You know.
Yeah. Let's take a look at your poem if you don't mind, reading that for us. So let me pull this one up here. So this is Naysaying the Noise. So whenever you're ready.
Okay. Naysaying the noise. I haven't found one thing the stars aren't a cure for. Hand me my mountain bag full of ripe plums, plummeting from flower bud to boiling pot to jam jar. I count the miles back out to Chaparral, heaving under the weight of my need to see everything and to be seen, seeing it. Would I feel less wanderlust if I could scrub off the dead glory of a nation obsessed with itself? Follow me to a hot spring tucked away behind some tall grass. Would you like that? I accelerate out to the wilderness, forgetting what I'm supposed to be forgetting, to get absolutely lost in the ridiculous brilliance of an acorn. I have everything I could ever want. And so I wonder how far the human race will go for a profit, whether we will ever find another home like this one. It's miraculous blue, it's hilarious oxygen. Every cat meme is a metaphor for the existential threat du jour. Somewhere, a teenage girl thinks her ears are too big. All we have is our experience. Just ask the Joshua trees, prophets of beauty, survival, and the Hawking Jays, what I wouldn't even call song. I want to give them to you. Their pointy heads and blue breasts flashing. Everyone deserves to follow the sky. What illusion am I breaking when I say no to the noise? I won't entertain hatred, refuse to listen to a man on the news spitting globs of fear in a language no oriole, no quail, no midnight bat, no creosote bush, no dire wolf, no waxing moon understands.
I love that poem. That's so
Thank
great.
you. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much, Nancy, for joining us today and spending your time with us and sharing your work. We really appreciate it very much.
Thank you,
And
Kenny.
viewers of West Trade Reviews Postscript, if you loved this episode, please follow us on YouTube and like our post there with Nancy. And please follow us on social media as well. And again, Nancy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I
Thanks.
had a great time.
Me too. Me too.